We all remember the Wells Fargo scandal, right? A massive story of consumer fraud. But what if I told you that behind the headlines about fake accounts and billion-dollar fines, there's a much darker, more personal story? It's one of systemic psychological abuse. Because what happened there wasn't just a banking scandal, it's a chilling case study in how immense corporate pressure can literally break people.
Just imagine hearing that from your manager, not as a one-off comment, but as a constant threat just hanging over your head. Well, for thousands of Wells Fargo employees, this was their daily reality. And that reality, it's what set the stage for one of the biggest corporate scandals of the 21st century.
So first, let's just quickly recap the part of the story most of us already know. The scandal that finally blew up in public was, well, it was just staggering in its scale. To hit these absolutely impossible sales targets, employees secretly opened over 2 million deposit and credit card accounts without the customers ever knowing. And let's be crystal clear, this was not a few bad apples. We're talking about a widespread, systemic practice that was happening all across the company.
It all came crashing down in 2016. Federal regulators swooped in and slapped the bank with $185 million in fines. And for the very first time, all the rot that was happening on the inside was exposed for the whole world to see. But this wasn't some sudden collapse. The roots of this crisis go way, way back to 2002. That's when this pressure cooker culture really got started. In fact, journalists had already started exposing the toxic environment back in 2013, a full 3 years before the regulators finally stepped in. So how does something like this even happen? To get it, we have to look past the fraud itself and really examine the internal machine that created it. It was a system built around one single relentless goal. On the surface, the strategy was pretty simple: cross-selling. The bank went to Wall Street and basically said, our genius is getting our customers to buy more and more of our products. This single metric became the cornerstone of their whole public identity. And they boiled that entire strategy down into a simple, catchy, and, as it turns out, incredibly toxic mantra: 8 is great. The goal? Every single customer should have 8 Wells Fargo products. But for the employees on the ground, this wasn't just a corporate target, it became a weapon. Just listen to how one former employee described the stakes. Missing your numbers wasn't just a performance issue. It was treated as a personal failure that put your entire livelihood on the line every single day. This little 3-step process was management's tool to keep everyone in line. But what it really did was create a constant state of anxiety where every single employee knew they were just a few bad days away from being fired. And the tactics they used to enforce that fear, let's just call it what it was: workplace bullying, just disguised as performance management. We're talking daily surveillance, public scoreboards that shamed low performers, and even ritual humiliation in team meetings. So what happens when you put people under this kind of relentless psychological pressure? Well, they get cornered. And eventually, the system pushed them right past their ethical breaking point. This was the actual advice coworkers were giving each other. Think about that. Fraud became normalized. And this wasn't about being malicious. It was purely about survival. It got to a point where doing the wrong thing actually felt safer than losing your job. And this right here, this is the absolute core of the issue. On one side, you've got the illegal acts that made all the headlines. But on the other, you have the perfectly legal behaviors that made it all possible. Impossible quotas, public shaming, constant threats. This was psychological abuse, plain and simple. And it was deeply, deeply harmful. The fraud, in the end, was just a symptom of a much deeper disease. The system was already causing profound psychological harm long before a single law was broken on this kind of mass scale. So when the scandal finally broke, who paid the real price? It wasn't the architects of the system. It was the frontline employees. The bank fired over 5,300 of them, basically scapegoating them for participating in a toxic culture that senior leadership had created and enforced. During a now famous Senate hearing, Senator Elizabeth Warren just laid out the ultimate betrayal perfectly. The bank pressured its people into cheating and then punished them for doing exactly what the system demanded of them all along. So why does this story still matter so much today? Because the Wells Fargo scandal isn't just about banking. It's a universal blueprint for how any high-pressure work environment can turn toxic and abusive. Listen to how one worker described the emotional toll. Not just stressful, not just demanding, a nightmare. every single day. That was the real human cost of those sales targets, a constant state of anxiety, dread, and guilt.
And it's a terrifyingly simple formula. You start with aggressive goals, you add fear through constant monitoring, you normalize intense pressure, you punish anyone who speaks up, and most importantly, you reward the results, no questions asked. This is how you push good people to do bad things.
Ultimately, the Wells Fargo story leaves us with a critical question. In this endless drive for results, for growth, for hitting the numbers, where do we draw the line? At what point does a push for high performance become an unacceptable tax on our humanity? It's a question every company, and really every single one of us, needs to answer.